Welcome to the Second Chance Hour. We talk to people making the best of their second chances. And today I want to introduce Matthew Cox. Hey, Matthew.
Hello.
Or do you prefer Matt or Matthew? Very formal.
Listen. I've been a Matt. I've been a David. I've been a Michael. I was a Joseph one time. I've been a Carter. So yeah, Matt's good.
Okay, Matt. Well, as we talk about people with second chances, we want to get a little background on you. But if we go way back, you have a very different history than a lot of the people we talk to, especially coming out of periods of incarceration. So you want to talk a little bit about your experience growing up?
Well, what do the other people say?
Well, most people say, oh, well, I never had a chance. And then I was scrambling by and I picked up drugs. And, this was kind of my way to survive on the street. And you managed to really be successful. Like you managed to kind of come from this place and put your life together in a way before things kind of fell apart.
Yeah, no, I was raised probably upper middle class.
Okay.
And so, I had plenty of chances. I actually, I have a college degree. I have a learning disability and, so I wasn't able to really, I wasn't able to work for somebody else. I tried to become an insurance adjuster. That didn't work out. I tried that for like a year and a half. I got laid off a couple times. So I ended up working construction jobs and, that's just horrible. So so then I ended up, I was dating a girl who was, worked as a stripper. She was going through college. I mean, literally, this is true. She was working her way through college as a stripper. I know this is cliche, but this is true. So I'd been dating her for a couple of years and we lived together. Really sweet girl. She ended up meeting a guy. She was getting her degree. Ended up getting her degree in finance. And she met a guy and he hired her to work at his company. And they were doing subprime loans. It was a huge subprime lender. And she said, you've got to do this. So I started doing mortgages. I went and got my license and somehow or another passed it was multiple choice. I'm great with multiple choice. So I passed that and I started working for this subprime lender in 2000, probably 1999 or 2000, probably 99. I think it was 98 or 99 is when I first started working there.
Okay. And so you had gone to college, you'd met this girl, you had, all these things coming together, but you went into kind of like a shady industry a couple years before that industry really fell apart. So what was your experience? I mean, was it sold to you as a scam or was it sold to you as, hey, we're doing good work. We're making sure people get in their homes. We're being fair.
Oh yeah. We're doing God's work. We're putting people in houses. It was always kind of scuzzy. It's scammy now. Yeah. I get calls from mortgage companies all the time. They caught some employee doing this or doing that. And then you talk to guys that are in the industry and they're like, listen, there's all kinds of shenanigans. Like it hadn't changed that much. I think it's just more serious where now they're prosecuting more people. But yeah, I went into that industry and so I very quickly started committing fraud. Like the first loan I did had fraud on it. Just if you're 25 years old, and well, no, not 25. I was probably 27. I think it was 27 or 28 by this point. So I'm like 27, 28, and I'm trying to start over again. By this point, I bought a house. I had a rental property. So I basically put everything, on hold and risked going and getting my license, going and being trained, and then working because you're not going to close a loan for weeks or months. Mm-hmm. And I got lucky. Like I knew immediately I'm going to work 80 hours a week. So I was there from open to close. But the very first loan I had fraud on it. Like, I mean, my manager looked at it, went through the paperwork, took one piece of paper aside and said, it looks perfect, but your client was 30 days late on her mortgage. I'm sorry, on her rent in the last like 2 years. And that means it's a dead deal. And I said, oh my God. And I was like, well, what do I do? And she goes, just white it out, make a copy, put it back. They'll never catch it. And I was, this is my manager. So I was like, wow. So I went ahead and did that and the loan closed. And then the next guy that came in, he didn't quite make enough money. So his W-2 from last year said he made like 45,000. And if he made like 50 or 49,000, he could get the loan. So I changed, a 5 to a 9 and a couple other numbers and made sure they all kind of looked right and sent it through, and that loan closed. And the next loan and the next, very quickly, nearly everybody that walked in, I was altering something to get them the loan. And that lender, after that lender, I left there and went to work for somebody else briefly. Then I opened my own company, and we were, I had like 8 guys, and then eventually it went up to like 12. I think it started with like 6 to 8. Then it went to 12. We were doing several million a month easily, and they all had some kind of fraud in them.
And so what is the percentage? What do you get on each loan?
Like if I closed it, let's say now, back then prices were way, way lower.
Yeah.
And so let's say the average house loan back then was, $100,000. Just the mortgage was $100,000. We would probably get $3,500, maybe $4,500 on that mortgage. So, and you could always, you can always jack up the price, and you can really put like points on the back of the loan and that sort of thing. You could maybe get 5,000 or 6,000, but most on average, you're looking between $3,500, $4,500 on a $100,000 loan.
So you're talking about 50 grand, 100 grand a month. That's a significant amount of money.
Well, that's what maybe the companies bring in, but I have to pay the employees. I would say my average employee was probably making 100,000 plus. And these are guys that they have high school diplomas. Some of these, I had one person that worked at a car lot and made about 40,000 a year, started working for me, immediately making 150,000 a year. I had a guy that worked at Pestex, spraying yards for pests.
Yeah.
Probably made 60,000 a year, jumped to 100 and something. These are all people that are just like, kind of just hustlers. And they got into doing mortgages with me, and very quickly started making money. And I did that for a few years, and ended up, I got married. I had over 50 rental units, and, nice house. I'm living about 3 or 4 blocks from my parents. Living, all of our neighbors are doctors and lawyers. These are houses that are going for, 300,000-400,000 back then, which is they're probably 800,000 or 900,000 now in Florida. That might as well be, that's like a $2 million house in LA.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was doing great. And then I got in trouble and got indicted for wire fraud. I'd lied on an application, and somebody I knew had gotten in trouble, and they handed my files over to the FBI, and the FBI, they wore a wire on me. And next thing I know, the FBI is calling me, and I go get a lawyer. I pay a lawyer like 75 grand. And he had me convinced I was going to jail. No dollar loss, wire fraud. Like I couldn't have gone to prison. There was no dollar loss. So he had me convinced I was going to go to prison unless I gave him 75,000. I gave him 75,000. And sure enough, I get 3 years probation. I was on probation now. I couldn't be a mortgage broker anymore. And so I started a larger, just straight scamming, as opposed to just changing little things here and there. I just went straight scamming. And what I did was I started making synthetic identities, people that didn't exist. Like I would go into Social Security. I eventually figured out how to go to Social Security and get them to issue me Social Security numbers for children that don't exist, right? Wow. So for a 10-month-old child, I'd have a Social Security number, and this kid doesn't exist. Like I made the birth certificate and everything. So I could name whatever the name I wanted. And then I would get that Social Security number, and I would apply for credit cards. I'd get 3 secured credit cards. I'd make the payments for 6 months, and suddenly the person would have 700 credit scores. I would then take that person and I'd go buy several houses for 50 or 60,000. I would record the value of those houses in public records at 200 plus.
Okay.
And then I'd refinance the houses. So that each one of these people could borrow maybe 180, 100 or 200,000 on each house. And so I would end up getting like $1 million in each person's name, each synthetic identity's name, and get credit cards, maybe $50,000 worth of credit cards that weren't secured. And then I'd run up everything, make 3 or 4 payments, and then I would stop paying. And when the creditor started calling, we would say that the guy he'd been in a car accident. He was currently in a coma. He's probably never going to work again. And I would actually have the sister write a letter and include a copy of an article in the newspaper. And we'd put his name in the newspaper saying he was life flighted and he was in critical condition. So the lender thinks, hey, sounds like, that happens. So they would foreclose on the properties, take the properties back, and they never knew they'd been scammed. They would lose 100,000, 150,000 per property, but that happens. Sometimes that happens. Like by the time they get the property back, it's in a bad neighborhood and the property's been gutted. Crackheads have gone in there, broken out the windows. It's been trashed, and they just, it happens. And so I borrowed $11.5 million in I don't know, 8 or 9 synthetic identities names. Eventually, somebody I knew got busted for fraud, and he worked with a task force that was put together, and then they handed the task force over to the FBI, and the FBI came to arrest me. I had a friend that was a sheriff's deputy, and he came and told me that the FBI was going to come arrest me in a couple of days.
Wow.
So I took off on the run, and I was on the run for 3 years. I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we had like $1 million or so, and we had a couple $1 million worth of properties, but I only had like a day to get money out of the bank. So I got like 80 grand out, immediately went to Atlanta, rented somebody's house, created a satisfaction of mortgage on his loan, satisfied his loan. So now I'm living in this guy's house. I made a fake ID as him, and I went and borrowed $400,000 as him on the house. I mean, I feel bad. I feel bad. I mean, it clearly caused some problems for him. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about how to get some money and get going, and he'll have to figure it out for himself. Yeah. So I got 400,000, took off. What did I do? Then I went to South Carolina, stole 1.3 million on a couple of houses. Same thing. Somebody actually owner financed their houses to me, borrowed 1.3 million. Actually was handcuffed in the bank and taken downtown and questioned on that one. But I convinced the detective that if there was a problem, there was a problem with the bank. Like clearly the bank messed up. I certainly, I had a real ID by that point. So I had a real driver's license. I was able to go into the DMV and get them to start issuing me driver's licenses. Like I've had 27 driver's licenses in 7 different states.
Wow.
I've had 24 passports. And so if the cops pulled me over and gave me a ticket, then I just got a ticket, in the name of whatever, Michael Eckert or Michael Johnson or, gosh, I've been, Joseph Carter. I've been I've been a bunch of different things. In that one, I was Gary Sullivan. So I end up getting a bunch of money. ended up going to Nashville, Tennessee. And I was there for about 1.5 years. I stole I borrowed, $3.5 million from multiple Nashville banks. And eventually my girlfriend, I was about to be on Dateline, NBC News. They were doing a 1-hour special on me. I'd already been in Fortune magazine, had come out with an article. Bloomberg had come out with 2 articles. I'd been in about 50 or 60 different articles in various newspapers around the country. And so, I knew I was in trouble, but this was going to be on the news. This was going to be on national news, nationally syndicated channel. And it wasn't like there was YouTube at the time.
Sure.
So people watched, they only watched like 4 or 5 channels. So people watched Dateline. And so I knew, I got to get out of the United States. So I was going to go to Australia, and I had a passport for a guy that was had no felony, and I was just going to go to Australia and kind of relocate there as a permanent resident alien, because you could do that. They didn't fingerprint you anything as long as you showed up with like $100,000 in a business plan. They would allow you to stay. But before I left, my girlfriend at the time confided in a friend of hers, and she contacted the Secret Service, and they came and they staked out my house for 3 days and then grabbed me one day.
Well, let me ask you this. So while you were on probation, before you started doing the scams, you were in a good place. You had 50 rental properties. You said you had $1 million. What was it, just like an addiction? Was it just this craving for more, or what drove you to take such a big risk while you were on probation?
It's funny because I've said this before about people, if anybody's seen my other interviews, like I've said this before, is that, so before I went to prison, right? Like, and I wrote a book, and, you start writing and stuff, you kind of have to do some, introspective, analysis of yourself and really look at yourself. And I would have said, and I always said, well, I needed the money. Well, I needed the money was okay. And then you get $100,000, and then you get $500,000, and then you get $1 million. And so now you've got $1 million. And why am I still going? When I first did it, was like, if I could just get like $100,000, then it was $500,000, then it was $1 million, then it's $2 million. So then at some point you kind of have to realize, okay, well, then it's not about the money. Mm-hmm. Like I can't say it's about the money. So really, I think looking into it, it's, I was raised by an alcoholic father who, I just never measured up to. Like he really, I think, expected a different son than he ended up with. Okay. My brother is extremely introverted. He's very quiet, doesn't argue, smart guy, but not super ambitious. And then he ended up with me. I have a learning disability. I'm failing classes. I have a hard time reading and writing. Like, I'm not super athletic. I'm 5'6". Like I'm not, like, my brother and I are not what my dad expected when he thought he was going to have kids. And he was an alcoholic, so he would let you know. He didn't have a problem telling you weren't going to measure up, that you weren't measuring up. And he worked like 80 something hours a week. I mean, this is a guy who was gone as soon as I got up, pretty much. He was leaving. And I came home, and he came home at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Yeah. And this was almost every day. So I would say it was just a deep insecurity and I really, really wanted to impress my father. Okay. And for a very short window, he was extremely impressed. He thought I was this super successful mortgage broker. I had 12 guys working for me. I'm kicking ass. I'm buying investment properties. He was in shock. Money was never a problem. And so I would have to say that that's really, what it is just comes from just deep insecurity.
Sure. I mean, that scarcity complex, it doesn't have to be financial. That's why I was saying, it feels like your story is different than a lot of people's in the childhood. You grew up in a nice home, but people assume that a nice home means like happy and healthy. And that's really not always the case. I know a lot of people who live in really nice homes who have incredibly abusive or incredibly, alcoholic family members who are really making their lives a living hell. So,
yeah. I hear, listen. And what's funny is, you go to prison and you think you got it bad, and you go to prison and you realize, my God, like that's why, I don't want to whine about it, because it's like, I know guys that were just horribly abused, guys that are sitting on the front stoop while their mother's having sex in the house or in the trailer or whatever. I mean, guys that they're making meth in the back room. I mean, it's just, like, there are horrible, horrible stories, beatings and, sleeping outside and being thrown out of the house, and just horribly abusive families that they've raised. So for me to sit there and say, daddy didn't hug me enough, poor you. But, and so I didn't really ever think about that until I started writing, and I started saying, and then people would say to me, well, I don't understand. And exactly what you said, they would go, well, you said you did it because you needed the money, but at this point you have like $1 million. How much money did you need? And it was like, yeah, you're right. What was I doing? What was I thinking? So, but regardless, it went bad. And I ended up going to prison. I got 26 years in prison, 26-year sentence, went to prison. And, I didn't know what to do. I kept thinking that my sentence was going to get reduced.
Okay.
The problem with that is that although when I got arrested, everybody involved in my case had already cooperated because, I'm not dealing with gangsters. Like these are white collar criminals. They cooperate. So, and you either cooperate. If you're guilty, you just cooperate. Because if you're smart and you look at they lay it out for you and you realize, holy Jesus, this is a scam and there's no way I'm winning this at trial.
Yeah.
So what is my alternative? And these guys are looking at, 5-10 years, or they cooperate and maybe they get a year or two. So they're all cooperating. So by the time I get there, me cooperating is not going to help me.
Yeah.
So, I sit down, I tell them a bunch of stuff, but it just doesn't go anywhere. And by that point, it's 2008, 2008. By the time the FBI is investigating anything, putting the whole kind of scam, the whole thing together, and the entire economy is collapsing. And so they don't really start arresting anybody. It's like, why would we arrest people from 5-6 years ago when there's crimes that are happening right now?
Sure.
So I go to prison with 26 years thinking maybe my sentence will get cut, and it doesn't. So now I'm stuck in prison, and everybody keeps telling me you should write a book. By this point I was on American Greed. I'd been on 2 1-hour specials with Dateline. There's just been all this media, a lot of press. And so I decided I was going to write a book. So I started writing my book, a memoir, and that took quite a while because I didn't really know how to write. So I had to read a couple of books on how to write. And, I actually read for a couple of years and, there was no hurry. And so I wrote a book. And then after I wrote that book, I got a literary agent and he came to see me. And as he was going to pitch my story, there was a guy named Ephraim Deveroli came on the compound, and it's the guy, Ephraim Deveroli is played by Jonah Hill in the movie War Dogs.
Sure, the arms dealer.
Right. So he was there, and I started talking to him, and he asked me to write his book for him, his memoir. So I wrote a memoir for him and put him together with my literary agent. So now they're working together, and he, of course, left with the book, and I'm stuck in prison, and they kind of break off contact with me.
Oh, wow.
Well, because their whole thing on even writing a book was that they wanted to sue Warner Brothers. Okay. Because by the time the book was finished, Warner Brothers was working on the movie. And they wanted to allege, and did allege, they sued Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers, ended up settling with them. And so they alleged that Warner Brothers got a hold of the manuscript, which they did get a hold of the manuscript, I believe. There's a lot of stuff that was going on that you never really, in a lawsuit like that, you never really find out, but you can kind of realize what's happening because like Warner Brothers never denied getting a hold of it. Okay. So anyway, I then also wrote a book. I wrote a book for a guy named, Douglas Dodd. It was and I ended up getting him into Rolling Stone magazine. And so we optioned the life rights for that, and I got a book deal for that. So I got a book deal with Skyhorse Publishing, got an advance, wrote his memoir. Then I started writing just true crime books where they weren't true crime memoirs, they were just true crime books. So what happened was a lot of guys just started showing up, and they would see that I had gotten guys in magazines. They saw that I'd written this book, that book, the books were being passed around. And so guys started coming out of the woodwork saying, hey man, can you write my story? Sure. And so I started writing their stories, and some of them I would write a whole book. And then some of them I would say, look, I don't have time to write a book, and you don't need a book to get a movie made or anything. You really just want your story out there. and you saying, hey, I have a story, and you being able to do something with it are two different things. You may have an amazing story, but if you don't have it written down and published, it's in your head and it doesn't mean anything. And so these guys are in prison, and they can't write their stories. It's difficult to write your own story.
Sure.
The hardest book I wrote was my book. Every book after that was much, much easier. And you could be a polished author and have written 10 books and turn around and say, okay, I need you to write your book. I guarantee you that guy would be in just absolute anguish. It's just super difficult to write about yourself because you don't see yourself how other people see you.
Yeah. Do you feel like you would have been able to do it outside of prison? Because you talked about the reflection and the introspection. That's something that incarceration does, because it just strips everything away and we're alone with our thoughts and kind of alone with that truth.
Oh yeah, I was just say it's the great equalizer, isn't it?
It really is.
Even if you're a multi-millionaire, the truth is you're a multi-millionaire, and maybe you get a little more commissary. You can afford a little more commissary. Maybe you can get somebody to make your bed. But when it all comes down to it, you're pretty much equal with the crackhead that has no money coming in. And in some cases, you're better, or you're not as good off. Like if you're a clean-cut white guy that was raised middle class, most white families will disown you or at least pull back. Whereas minority families are used to their loved ones going to prison every once in a while. They'll support them. They'll come visit them. They'll put money on their books. They understand that. Like I know a lot of white guys that would go to prison, and nobody wanted, their family was like, yeah, they'd come see them at once every 6 months. They had to beg them to could you send me $50? And it's
so what was your relationship with your father and your brother while you were in?
Oh, I mean, my brother came to see me. My brother came to see me because my mother made him drive her. Like he never came by himself. And my father came twice, I think once with my mother and once by himself. And that was it. My sister, both of my sisters never came to see me. They're humiliated. So, and that tends to, that's the funny thing is that does happen. They're like, I don't understand. Like, it's like you had every single opportunity out there. Yeah, you struggled a little bit, but you're a salesman. You could have sold cars. You could have you could have done anything. You could have survived on a job making $50,000, $60,000 a year. People do it.
Yeah.
But it's greed and just arrogance and narcissism, and it just wasn't possible for me. But yeah, so I think if I hadn't gone back to your original question, if I hadn't gone to prison, I never would have looked at myself, as the person, that I really am. Like if somebody 15 years ago said I was a narcissist, I would have been extremely offended. When I would read the newspaper and they would call me a con man, I'd get so upset. They don't know me. They don't. Now I read those articles and I'm like, yeah, I see. I could see that. Oh, he has it. This guy, this reporter, he hit on the head. Listen to what he said. I mean, and they're horrible things. Most people, when they hear them, are like, oh, wow, that's horrible. But I don't see it like that anymore. It's just a part of my character traits, and, it's just the way it is. I mean, some people like me, and I have two kinds of people. I really do. I have people that love me and people that just despise me. And,
Sure.
and I'm okay with that. Like you have to be like, you can't make everybody like you.
So was there a pivotal moment though, where like the truth hit you that you started to reflect on yourself? Because most people don't describe themselves talking about narcissism and greed and these things that are very raw and very real.
Yeah. I would say that when I was reading, I can't. Okay. So this is horrible because there was actually, I've read probably 3 books on how to write like memoirs.
Mm-hmm.
And these are books that are written by, people that have written amazing memoirs, right? Like, and the best one I read was probably 110 pages, tiny little book by some woman who had written 3 memoirs about herself. And she just summed it up. Like, she was like, look, if you don't think there are things in your childhood that shaped you, there are. You have to acknowledge that. And you need to find those things that shaped the person that you are. They're there. Stop denying it. Look for them. Like, it was just very, very cutthroat. And so you kind of start looking through your life and saying, what are some pivotal things that just stick out? And she even said in the book, that if you think that you've forgotten those things, you haven't, because they shaped who you are, and you will remember those stories from your childhood that play in your mind that you don't believe mean anything are extremely important. And I have all of these little tiny moments when I was growing up that have stuck with me that I didn't realize meant anything at the time. So it was definitely that little book. And I just feel like such a shit for not remembering it. Like, I lent it to somebody who was wanted to write a memoir, and he took it, and then I never got it back. I'm furious at myself for not knowing where it is. But yeah, I would definitely say that was, and there are hard truths. She was just like, look, there are hard truths you're just going to have to own up to. And
okay, so how many years are you when you're writing these and you're putting together these essays and you're gathering everybody's story? How many years in?
I mean, I started writing about 3 years in. When I got to the low, I was at the medium security prison for 3 years. So when I really just got to the low, I started writing.
Okay.
I'd written a little bit before that. I started like a few months, and then they transfer you. They pick up all your stuff and move it. Like, literally, they picked up my stuff and moved it across the street to the low, and it took about 3 months. So 3 months later, I get my stuff, continue the story, write the story, and then I rewrote it over the next 6 months to a year. So probably 4 years in. Now I think about 4 to 5 years in before I started writing other people's stories.
Okay.
And I did that until I walked out the door.
And how much time did you do total?
Total, I did 13 years. I had one of the guys that I wrote a story about. His name is Frank Amadeo. He's a lawyer, a disbarred lawyer. He filed 2 2255s for me.
Okay.
The first 2255 he filed was based on the fact that I had cooperated. Like, you have to think, the government asked me to be interviewed by Dateline and American Greed.
Just real quick, so people know, 2255 is a federal habeas, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's essentially saying that your lawyer was ineffective, right? That my lawyer didn't really help me. Now in my case, it's not that my lawyer didn't help me, it's that my lawyer didn't understand the law. My lawyer told me what the government was telling them. And the truth is, if you cooperate with the government per statute, and that cooperation doesn't lead to the arrest of another person or further an investigation, then the government doesn't have to, they can't reduce your sentence. They can't even request it. And so she was telling me if I would be interviewed by Dateline and American Greed, that they would cut my sentence. But they didn't. Okay. So now what do I do? You're telling me that's cooperation, and it's not. Okay. So that was the basis of the argument, was that you lie, you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, they bring me back to court, and I end up getting 7 years knocked off my sentence.
Wow.
I then as soon as I get back, I'm walking the compound with this guy. His name was Ron Wilson. He ran a $57 million Ponzi scheme. He was cooperating with someone. So he was cooperating with the government to try and get his sentence reduced. And I know all this is taboo, by the way.
So that's what I was going to ask, because in blue collar prisons, anybody who cooperates is shunned and stuck to the side. It sounds like in white collar prisons, it's almost lifted up, or it's normalized, or it's different.
No. Keep in mind too, there's a ton of there's a ton of drug dealers, mobsters. Like, they're all saying that, you're a snitch, you're a scumbag, piece of garbage, piece of that, but they're at a low. So they may be saying it behind your back, but they're not saying it to your face. Okay. Like, nobody wants to go anywhere. Like, your mom or your wife or your daughter lives an hour and a half away, you get into have a problem with me or with someone else, then they're going to ship you across the country. And on top of that, the truth is that about 80 to 90% of the people in the lows and mediums cooperate.
Yeah.
So you can run around and call everybody a snitch, but you don't really want anybody looking into you. So they do it around, behind their back. And I know people say stuff and, they make snide comments, but nobody's coming up to me and saying anything.
Okay.
And if they did ask directly, then I would say, if they asked anything like, yo, bro, I heard you got your sentence reduced. What's up with that? I'd be like, what's up with what? And that's what you heard. And they go, oh, is that true? I go, yeah, it's true. I didn't come here to make friends. I'm ready to go home. You and I will never talk again. I'm leaving here. And if I have to cut every single person's head off of this in this fucking institution to do it, I'll do it. We're not friends. So if you're thinking there's a code, there's some street code that you're going to go in a bank with a gun, or you're going to kidnap somebody and tie them up, or you're going to sell crack, but you have a code, but you won't tell on your criminal friends, you're fucking fooling yourself, bro. That's just helping you sleep at night. Because 95% of people cooperate against each other.
I remember I worked in the law library, and one of the leaders of one of the gangs came in and said, hey, with Obama's new crack legislation, like, can you look at my sentence? And I remember looking at it and being like, hey, this didn't make any sense. Like, you were sentenced way under sentencing guidelines. You can't get your crime reduced. And he freaked out. He blanched. He got white in the face. He was like, yo, you can't talk about that. You can't tell nobody that. And I'm like, this is a guy who's holding up the ultimate like virtue and supposed to be the leader. And he told on a bunch of people to get his federal sentence reduced. So like you said, I think it was a lot more common than people realized.
Yeah. Listen, these guys aren't stupid either. I knew a guy who literally he was supposed to be getting like 30 years. He cooperates. When he got sentenced in front of the judge, they were going to give him 178 months. And he asked, can you give me 180 months? Because that way he could say he got the minimum mandatory, or the mandatory minimum of 180. Because if he got below it, then the people that saw his paperwork would know you cooperated to get under that. Now, he was supposed to get 30, but it goes in increments, like 30 years, 25 years, 20 years, 15. So whenever he got to some place, they would ask him how much, hey man, we're going to need to see your paperwork. And he'd pull out what's called a judgment commitment. He go, I got my judgment commitment right here. I was charged with this. I got the mandatory minimum right here, 180. And they'd go, oh, okay, man, you're good. You're good. And then they would tell everybody he's good. He got the mandatory minimum. He didn't cooperate. And that was it, because he couldn't show his PSR, his pre-sentence report. He couldn't show that because that showed that he was supposed to get 30 years and he cooperated. Sure. And this is a guy who, by the way, would walk around and call everybody a snitch.
I'm sure.
Oh, we're going to need to see that dude's paperwork. I'm going to need to see that guy's paperwork. It was like, what are you talking about? Like, just don't say anything. Like, I'm not saying you have to go around telling everybody, but for God's sakes, at least don't try and make it hard for everybody. But regardless, so I'm walking around. I get back from being resentenced, and I'm walking around with this guy, Ron Wilson, and he's cooperating. And he's only really talking to me about it because when he first got there, he had gotten 19 and a half years.
Okay.
And we hadn't been hanging out a day or two before I said, 19 and a half years. I was like, Ron, you're like 60 something years old, or you might die in here. And he just looked at me, and I said, honestly, I said, like, if you didn't cooperate, I said, you need to start thinking about making a phone call. I said, because if you're thinking that something's coming down the pike and they're going to bring back parole or something, that's not happening. You're going to do 95% of your sentence. I said, and these people will let you die in here. Like, they are not going to go out of their way to help fix you. You get sick, you're on your own. And he was like, so, and he had heard things about me. So one day he kind of confides in me that he is cooperating. And I'm like, well, I hope it works out. Anyway, we end up walking around, and he's, over the course of months, he ends up telling me that he thinks that he'll never get his sentence reduced, even if the guys that he's cooperating against end up getting charged and thrown in, and convicted. And I keep saying, why? And he goes, well, because the government thinks that I've hidden money.
Okay.
And I said, well, did you? And he's like, no. And he's like, no, of course not. I'm like, all right, then don't worry about it. They would have to prove that to withhold your cooperation. Like if it's blatant that you're cooperating, they indict someone and those people go to prison, like there's really no justification to not give you something unless you lie to them. And so we're still walking around. He brings it up a couple of times. And then one day I say, man, why do you keep bringing this up? And he looks at me. I said, I mean, you didn't hide any money, so don't worry about it. And he looks at me and he goes, can I trust you? And I go, probably not. And that's what he did. He laughed. He goes, he knows I just came back from being resentenced, by the way.
Yeah.
Like everybody knew that. It spread like wildfire. So he says, I did hide some money. I said, really? And he goes, yeah, like I gave, my brother's got like, he's got like, I don't know, 20 or 30,000. And my ex, he said, my soon to be ex-wife has maybe $150,000. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, but they haven't given it over. So what are you worried about? He goes, my soon to be ex-wife found out I was having an affair.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think she's just going to turn it in just to do it. And I think my brother will do it just out of guilt. Or if they ask him about it, he'll do it. I was like, holy shit. And he said, yeah, so I'm very concerned about that. And I was like, man, I said, yeah, well, I said, I doubt they will do that. He said, I just trust me. They're going to do it. I said, okay, whatever. I happened to talk to my lawyer about, honestly, like a month later, because when I laid in bed that night, I thought that's not enough. Like if I were to mention it if I were to make a phone call or mention it, and they're not going to indict this guy. Nothing's going to happen. They didn't want to give me a reduction the first time. So for less than 200,000, they're not going to give me a reduction. So I was like, I didn't say anything. Well, I ended up talking to my lawyer about a month later. I was calling to get copies of my transcripts, which she said she was going to send me, and she never did. So I called her. And so she said, oh yeah, I got to do that. I'll do that. She goes, so what's going on? I said, nothing really. She goes, anything happening in there? Now, when has a lawyer ever wanted to talk to you on the phone? I mean, normally they're like, oh, okay, all right, I'll get to it. And they hang up the phone. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I don't know, anything happening? Like anything you want to talk about? Or this woman, like, I was like, okay, so you know what? I got something weird that happened the other day. And I tell her, and she goes, well, let me look into it. I said, all right. I hang up the phone. A week later, I get called into SIS, which is like the internal security. They call me to SIS's office. I walk in, the lieutenant says, sit down. And I go, what's up? And he pulls out the phone and he goes, here's the phone. And he hands me the phone, and it's a Secret Service agent. And it's Ron Wilson's Secret Service agent. He says, I understand that you know where Ron Wilson has hidden Ponzi scheme money. And I go, whoa. I said, nah, bro. I said, I'm not just going to tell you that. I want something proof that you're going to do something for me. I'm not going to tell you. I said, and he goes, oh, I promise you'll get something for it. I said, no, you're not in a position to promise me anything. You're just an FBI agent or Secret Service agent. Anyway, what ends up happening is U.S. attorney says they'll reduce my sentence if it leads to a prosecution or the recovery. They end up going and calling the brother and wife into Secret Service. The wife shows up with $350,000 in cash and gold and silver.
Oh, wow.
Bars of silver. So the brother shows up with $150,000 in cash. They both get charged. They get misdemeanors. They get like 6-month probationary sentences. And Ron Wilson gets recharged. He gets 6 months added onto his sentence. So he gets his 19 and a half years went to 20 years.
Okay.
I then have to file another 2255 because the government says, it's not enough. So we filed another 2255. The guy, Frank, filed it for me, and they knocked 5 years off my sentence. So the interesting thing about Frank Amadeo is the disbarred lawyer that did all this for me. And by the way, I contacted 2 lawyers on the street, and both of them said, you can't force the government to reduce your sentence. I was in the Fifth Circuit. In the Fifth Circuit, it's just not going to be possible. Like, there's no reason to take money. There's no reason to even talk about it. It's not going to happen. But Amadeo said, no, I'll get time knocked off. Frank Amadeo is a rapid cycling bipolar with features of schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
that he's a disbarred attorney. He thinks that God is talking to him and has been telling him since he was a teenager that he's preordained to be emperor of the world. And he believes this. Like, and you can talk to him about it. He believes it's true. He's very well spoken. He does have these extreme manic moments when it's bizarre, but he also was walking guys out the front door. Wow. He put together a medium-sized law firm from in the prison. He hired guys to do research. He hired people to write motions. He filed 2 motions for me for $22.55. He paid for everything, including the typing and the stamps to mail it. And he was doing it for all kinds of people. If he thought you had a case, he'd take it on. He was hiring guys to write motions for child support, divorces, 2255s for just listen, all kinds of different things he was doing in there. It was amazing. He also helped me fight my my case again when I sued Warner Brothers and Deveroli. He helped me write that up. So he was amazing. I mean, he literally got 12 years knocked off my sentence.
Okay.
So he's a fascinating guy. He got out of prison. Here's what's really interesting. Remember the guy, Ron Wilson? Ron Wilson got out of prison on the CARES Act. Like a few years, like 2 or 3 years after, no, 2 years after I left, he left. So on his 20-year sentence, Wilson did like 5 years, 5 or 6 years on a 20-year sentence.
Well, like you said, this sounds like what's actually going on behind the scenes at most federal prisons. Like people pretend that it's only just violent and nobody's snitching and nobody's doing this, but everybody's really just fighting to get out. And then the question is, what are they going to do when they get out? So you get out after 13 years, you've got this past behind you, you've got a family who, doesn't necessarily want anything to do with you. What do you do with yourself?
Well, so when I went in, I got arrested in late 2006. And keep in mind, I think that, so YouTube was had just started. It wasn't a thing, right? Like it wasn't really what it's evolved into. I'd never been on it. And podcasts weren't a thing. It wasn't until I was about 2 years to the door when people started telling me about new guys coming in who would read my stories. By this point, I'd written almost probably 20 synopses of true crime stories and several books, whatever, 4 or 5 books at this point. I was still working on some. Guys are reading them, just passing them around. And guys are like, you got to get out and do a podcast. Well, I don't know what a podcast is. I don't know what that means. That's a new term. People are like, they don't realize, like when I went into prison, that's not even a word, podcast. So guys are telling me you got to do a true crime podcast. So I finally, I read a couple articles and I thought when I got out, I should do some kind of true crime podcast. And a lot of these guys, when I was locked up, I realized because I'd optioned the life rights for a couple of guys while I was locked up, I realized that their life rights were worth something. So if you came to me and said, Matt, can you write my story? I would say, yeah, I'll write your story, but you have to connect your life rights to the story. And then if I get out, I'll give you a portion of whatever I make on your story. Now, you don't really have a choice because you've been locked up 7 years and by this point, you've got a story, but you can't write it.
Okay.
So, and I'm telling everybody when I get out, I'm going to make an effort to try and get these things turned into documentaries or movies or series of some type. And so they're all like, okay, that's cool. So I wrote their stories. And when I got out, what I did was, I got out, I went to the halfway house. I had no money. I had about $400. I went.
You had sold these books. You'd gotten advances. You'd sold life rights. What happened to the money?
Well, I mean, keep in mind, I don't really have anybody sending me money in prison. Like my mom would send me 100 here, 100 here. But, and I would get a check in for $3,500 or $5,000, but that's every 18 months. That's not going to last long. I'm using, it's called TrueLink. To type on the computer and make phone calls and stuff, it costs money.
Yeah.
I'm not blowing this money on commissary. I spent almost no money on commissary. I'm getting coffee and creamer. That's it. So what happened was I had about $400. So I went to Walmart and I got $300 worth of clothes. I have no clothes. And which $300, by the way, is not a lot of clothes. I got a job at a gym, and probably a month or so after I'd been at the halfway house, my ex-wife called me and said, "You got a letter here from a law firm." Remember the guys that we optioned their life rights?
Sure.
It had been 18 months and they re-optioned it.
Okay.
So they cut me a check for like $6,000. So I was able to go out and buy a Jeep, a really old, a Jeep Liberty, which is like a girl's Jeep. So I bought like a chick Jeep, an old chick Jeep, and I bought paid for a year's worth of full coverage insurance, and put some new wheels on it, some new tires, and I'm basically out of money again. And so I had a job. I started saving money. I wanted to start a website and put some of the stories on the website, and I have all but maybe 3 stories on the website. So, but that costs money, and you have to have a computer, and you have to have, Final Cut, well, not Final Cut Pro, but you have to have like Photoshop, and you have to pay for a service and all that stuff. And I didn't know how to do any of that. So there were guys in prison that sent me money to buy the computer.
Oh, wow.
To pay for everything. So my buddy Pete, who's still locked up, and I always get fucked up when I think about this. So my buddy Pete, who I would talk to every once in a while, he would say, "Well, when are you going to put up when are you going to do your website?" And I'd say, "Pete, it costs money. I don't have a computer. I don't have, you can't, how am I going to put up? I don't even have a computer. There's no computer at the halfway house. It's a computer. It's not even hooked to the internet. Like, there's no, like you had a cell phone. Like, I can't do it on my cell phone, And he was like, "What do you need?" I said, "I need a computer." He goes, "How much can you get a used computer for?" I said, "About $400. You could probably get a shitty MacBook for $400. I said, "And then it's going to cost $100 and some odd to get like what do you call it? A WordPress website. And then you have to get the actual the domain name. And then you have, I started naming off all the things that I needed to do." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll get you the money." And I was like, "Well, how?" And he said, "Well, because people are always stopping me when I'm walking across the compound. They're always like, 'How's Matt doing? How's Cox doing?'" And he would always say, "Oh, he's fine. He's cool." And they go, "Does he need anything?" He goes, and I always tell him no. He goes, "I'm going to start telling him yes." So probably 2 weeks after that, somebody mailed me a laptop. I got the money to buy another laptop. Like, they showed up at the same time. I subscribed to get a WordPress, and I started putting up all the stories. By that point, I had been interviewed by, oh gosh, who was it? It was the Atlantic magazine. Forbes had interviewed me about, basically they called it like the true crime writer in Cell Block 4 is what they called it. So there were these articles coming out, and I optioned a few of my, within months, I'd optioned a couple more stories. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. I've been optioning stories. I've been writing. I do, I paint paintings. I told you I have a degree in fine art. So that's basically, like worthless, but I can paint. So I paint paintings, and, my books, I make money off my books, not a ton. And I started a podcast, a YouTube podcast. Okay. About 2 years ago. So I've been out over about a year and a half before I even started the podcast.
Okay.
So I started a podcast where I just interview guys that have been released from prison, or guys that have interesting true crime stories, or, correctional officers, or that sort of thing.
Sure. So have you been able to help the guys out inside that you option their rights?
Have I been what?
The guys that you option their stories. Have you been able to help them out, or send them some money, or get them a connection, or?
I can send them some money. I don't know how much that helps them out. Like, if you option something for, like if I optioned a one guy story for like $3,000, like I'm able to send his mom $1,500. Is that helping him out? I don't know. I don't know how much $1,500 in prison is going to help you out. But if his story gets made,
Sure.
Honestly, like, I don't think it's the money that a lot of these guys are concerned about. I mean, not that they wouldn't, get the money if the stories get made, but there's not a ton of money in it. What I think is, they want their story told.
Sure.
So the few that I've optioned, I've given them, usually I have about a 50-50 deal with them. So I've given them 50%, but it's $1,500. Like, I know what they want. They want it to get made. They want to end up making $500,000 or $1 million. But I think they would be happier if the story would just get made. Because some of these guys have great stories.
Well, I'm sure the stories are good, and maybe a lot of these guys are white collar criminals, so they have access to resources. But I remember when the stimulus checks hit, when we were still locked up. My God, it was amazing. Because people who couldn't buy anything could suddenly buy coffee and buy food and get on the phone and call, and they had enough money to send emails, and there was just this transformation in the mindset of the guys who've been struggling. So I just think about it may not be a lot in the long run, and it may not change their lives, but it'll at least give them something to start with. And then, like you said, if their story can get told, and the doors that could open, or just the validation that, hey, my story is worth telling.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess, I would love to have their stories made. Like, I guess that's more me saying, okay, I can give you $1,500. Like, but I know, like, and I know $1,500 means a lot, right? Right. Like, I got a check for I got an advance for 3,500. When I didn't option, sorry. When I got one of the book deals. Listen, that was a ton of money. I was thrilled to have it, but I was more thrilled when I got that book in my hand. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't money. It was like, hey, you can do something.
Sure.
So, yeah. So I would love to get these guys' stories made. And I'm working with 3 different production companies right now on 3 different stories that 2 of them actually probably, I don't know if it's this week or next week, are getting pitched to a large streaming network. You can imagine who, I'm sure. And if that doesn't work out, it'll be one, then it kind of goes down the line.
Sure.
It would be great. I would be thrilled to see that happen. Not that it matters, because I was joking with this guy the other day. We were talking about getting something, getting getting a docuseries made, or getting a film made. And I thought, wouldn't it be horrible if it got made? And you go to the theater and you sit in the theater and you watch it and you walk out and you're like, yeah, it was all right. It was good. I don't think it'd be nearly as much fun as I've had writing it and pitching it.
Sure.
It's like trying to get it made has been a lot of, it's up and downs, but it's fun. You're talking to producers, you're talking to directors, you're talking to screenwriters, you're talking like this. These are amazing process to go through. It's horrible and it's cutthroat, and it's treacherous. But my fear is you get the movie made and you're like, it kind of sucked. It's almost more fun to just try and get it made. I'm sure any of these get made. I like to think that they'd be amazing, but it's kind of like popcorn. Like, popcorn smells amazing, but you try the popcorn, you're like, yeah, it's all right.
Okay. I mean, so you're a published author. You're working on getting these shows or movies or whatever made, documentaries, and you're telling people stories. And you've already kind of shared your own story. You also mentioned that you've done some community work, or gone to speak at groups, or gone to speak at sheriff's associations, or kind of talked about what you did or what that path was.
Oh yeah, I do the whole, I speak at mortgage. I would say mortgage. It's like loan officers, they call them.
Okay.
At loan officer associations, they'll fly me out and I tell my story, and you tell it for 45 minutes and then you answer for 15 minutes. You answer questions, and I've in the last 2-3 weeks, Hillsborough County has had me come out and talk to their detectives. They're like 40 detectives, and they're financial crimes division. And I'm supposed to talk in front of like a thousand, like over 1,000 investigators from like around the world. Actually, it's in Tampa this year. And I'm going to do that. I have cybercrime or cybersecurity companies and conventions. They asked me to come out and do the same thing. So I do that. I do that also. That's not like every month though. I want it to be every month. It's just
because I remember the first time I heard your story, I thought of the movie Catch Me If You Can, the Frank Abagnale, who like went from being the ultimate kind of like con man or guy getting away with things to working with the FBI. It seems like you kind of created this position where you have your experience and you're using that to inform. And I don't think people have a lot of sympathy for white collar criminals. Like they may have a code for people that do certain things in their neighborhood, but when somebody's like scamming, I mean, then again, the bank can obviously afford to lose some money, probably a lot more than a grandma can, but I feel like there's a different kind of approach to that. Like society really wants those people to get caught, and you doing your work is probably going to be more supported by society than it is by a certain subculture.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I agree. I think that, so when I talk in front of the loan of the, like these financial associations, you know, I'm really more talking to the brokers, because there's more fraud committed by mortgage brokers and loan officers than there are by individual people out there. Because you go to the bank, you don't really know what documents, you don't even know what they're looking for, so you don't know what to fix or forge. You could lie a little here, a little there, but you have to back it up with something. So that's hard to do without somebody on the inside. So really, I'm really talking to the loan officers and trying to explaining like it's a slippery slope. Like I started by whiting out a 30-day late, and by the end of my reign, you know, I'm manufacturing people, I'm manufacturing value, I'm borrowing, you know, 10, 11, up to what, $15 million. You know, like this is, you know, it's like it can go very bad very quickly. To do what? To make a $1,500 or $3,500, you know, broker fee? Like, you know, think about it. Like it's, you know, you know, and then I always get somebody who asks me, you know, was it worth it? Like, no, it wasn't worth it. I did 13 years in prison. I got out. I'm 50 years old, rebuilding my life. Like I'm a scumbag. Like people look at me and they look me up and they see me and I'm a scumbag. Like, no, it's not worth it. Like you must be an idiot to say, you know, I love the guys that, you know, well, it made me the man I am today. Yeah. Okay. I get it. But let's face it, if you could go back and change it, wouldn't you spend that time with your family?
Sure.
You know, like, so that's really what I kind of push on that. And then with law enforcement, you know, the problem is they always want to know, well, how do we fix this? But that's tough. Like the more you put, the more, you know, you put out there or regulations to fix things, the harder it is for just regular people to get loans. So that's difficult. And then the way to really fix it requires so much money to create a system that's nearly foolproof that, you know, nobody's going to dump that kind of money into it. And look, the fact is that criminals are going to find their way around it at some point anyway. They're going to create a loophole or take advantage of one. It's tough. So I honestly think when I'm at most of these things, I'm there as a cautionary tale,
okay,
and partially, you know, entertainment, you know, unfortunately, and just kind of, you know, just trying to kind of say, hey, you know, like almost like a warning, you know, like you know, yeah, like a cautionary tale. There's just a warning, like, hey, don't, like, rein yourself in. Like, don't think it won't catch up with you. It's not worth it. The money's not worth it. I'm happier now than I've ever been.
Yeah, with less money, right?
Oh, barely. Listen, every month, scraping the eye. But
I think there's a lesson there, though. Yeah,
it's great though. It's great. Life is so good out here. Like I didn't realize how good I had it before I went to prison, with a lot more. And I get out now and I realize just how lucky I am. And I see people complaining about everything. And I'm thinking, I mean, life is amazing out here. Like you have a car and a house and you have YouTube and you have 150 channels to choose from and series and Netflix and Hulu. And oh my God, I mean, it's just insane. And you're complaining because, because the price of milk, went up, and and that's horrible. And I get it, but listen, it beats the alternative. Like it ain't worth getting. It's not worth going and committing a crime and ending up in jail. Like you think it's bad now. Wait till you're sitting in a cell somewhere. Now you know what bad is. This is not bad.
Sure. Well, in continuing your legitimate means, where can people find your podcast and your YouTube?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's Matthew Cox Inside True Crime is what my YouTube is. And my website is insidetruecrime.com. And I put everything is narrated. Like I have written versions of everything, but you can hit a button and it'll bring you to a narration because I hate to read. I mean, it's true. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got. Right. Well, I have my books are on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. My name of my memoir is Shark in the Housing Pool.
Okay.
Listen, and I hate to say this, but it's great. It's a great book. It's a great book. They're all I had plenty of time to write them, so they're good books, and yeah, a lot of fun.
Well, I'll put a link in the description to your website and to the YouTube, and people can check you out on Amazon. And thank you for joining me.
Sure, no problem.